I have the great and wonderful honor of being the chaplain of St. Dominic's High School. We have many of our students here tonight. Actually, before I get into this, if you need to go to confession, just even while I'm talking, just go. You see in the gospel, Jesus is always very conscious of being etiquette and kind, but sometimes when it comes to his healing and mercy, he doesn't care too much about etiquette. So if you're like landlocked in the middle of a pew, climb over everybody to get to confession. Don't worry about it. It's okay. I'm not going to stare at you. Just go. Think about it in the Gospels. When they're going to Jesus for healing, they literally open the roof of somebody's house just to lower somebody in. Sometimes we can kind of set etiquette aside when we're running to the Lord for mercy. So at any point, go to the back for confession. So as I was saying, the chaplain of the great St. Dominic's High School, and we were at an event at the cathedral not too long ago, and a brother priest of mine let out a secret that I didn't want my students to know, a certain term that they have for the youngest priest of the diocese. As he came up to me and my students, he said, "Look who it is, the baby priest." And now my students know. They started to call me that, and I told them that if anybody calls me a baby priest, they get detention. But it's true. Father Stephen Rooney, Father Louis Kona, and I, we are the baby priests of the diocese. We've been ordained less than a year. This past year is the best year ever, best year of my entire life, actually. And I was often explaining to people this year that I'm new. I'm new at all this. This year is the first time I went to Mass, the first time I celebrated Mass, not the first time I went to Mass. Trust me. I've gone to Mass many times. It was the first time I heard a confession. The first time I did a lot of priest things. And so I was always reminding people that I'm new at this, that there's a priest, Father Tom Coogan, our pastor, who's an expert. And if they had any really difficult things, to go to him. He's been a priest for 25 years. So I'm not an expert priest yet. I'm still a baby priest. But if I could say, over the years, I think, if there's one thing maybe I've become an expert in, and there's one thing, I spent much of my life, probably like half of it, many years, praying about one question. And I think I'm an expert in maybe this, I don't know. The one question I prayed about for a long time is God calling me to be a priest. And so I consider myself an expert maybe in praying about one question with God for a long time. And tonight I'm not just talking about priesthood, not just talking about an expert in discerning the question of priesthood, but maybe we all have in our heart. Most of us journey in life, I think, in our life of prayer, focusing maybe, usually at different stages of our life, on one big question, one big thing to discern, the next big question, the next big step in our lives. Maybe it's religious life or the priesthood, maybe it's just wanting to marry somebody, a new job, maybe what college to choose. I know we have that a lot in the high school. Maybe a big change, a big question, a move, moving to a new place, getting a new house, whatever it is. Oftentimes, if we go down to our spiritual life, we're praying about one big question. And if you find yourself maybe praying a lot about one big thing, if you want my expert opinion on that, I would say stop. Don't do it. And before they disinvite me from being here again, I want to explain that. Because the whole point is to pray for vocations, I know, but if you have a big question on your heart and you ask Jesus over and over again that question, I'm going to invite you tonight to stop. You know, when I was discerning the priesthood, that big question in my life, I got to a point in college, especially my last 2 years, where I was so focused, sorry, this microphone is very fuzzy. I was so focused on the question, is God calling me to be a priest? Right, every day when I would pray in the morning, that was the question I would ask. At Mass, whenever I'd pray at the Eucharist, I'd look at the priest and I'd say, is God calling me to do that? All of my prayer time with Jesus focused on that one big question. And now let's put this into another perspective. Imagine if that were the case with a guy who thought he was going to ask his girlfriend to marry him. Probably a situation maybe some of you here have been in. What if every single day he asked his girlfriend, hey, do you think we should get married? What do you think? You think one day we're going to get married, one day we're going to be husband and wife? What if he asked her that every single day, every time they spoke? You know what? They're not going to get married. It's not going to happen. They're not going to get married. What does she want from him? Dinner, time, friendship, affection, love, just time together. And I found that I was so focused on that one question that I was neglecting the one thing that drew me to Jesus in the first place, our friendship, the love I had for him. What drew me to discern priesthood at the beginning. And we can do this with God so often, can't we? We could ask him the same thing over and over again, even if it's a good thing, even if it's a thing that we need help with. But all he wants is our friendship, our time, what we're doing tonight, just sitting before him. And who knows this better than the disciples in our gospel today, don't they? On the road to Emmaus, they're conversing and debating. They're confused. They're asking Jesus all these questions. They're asking if Jesus was the Messiah. They're focused on this one big thing. They say, we thought that this was going to happen. We thought this guy was the Messiah and that he was going to save us, but now he died. And yeah, we've heard about a resurrection, but we're asking, is it true? And what is the big question in their hearts? They're kind of obsessed with the future. They focus on what they thought God's plan would look like in their eyes. And they're asking, what do we do now? What's the future going to look like? The big question. And they're so preoccupied with that question, that good question, a beautiful question in their hearts, the next step, that literally the risen Lord is in front of them and they can't recognize him. Does it sound familiar? It sounds familiar in my life. It sounds probably familiar in a lot of our lives with that big thing in our hearts, the thing we're discerning. But Jesus walks with those disciples only desiring one thing, friendship, time, to journey together, so much so that he walks with them in the wrong direction for a whole day just so they can recognize him. I think often of the beautiful passage in the book of Revelation. Jesus is speaking to the churches. And what does he say to them? He says, I'm so proud of you. You guys have endured hardships. You've persevered. You're hardworking. Your faith is beautiful. But what does he say? He says, all that, but I hold this against you. You have forgotten your first love. You've forgotten your first love. And I know what that feels like. I found in my discernment the big question took the place of my first love, which was Christ, a first love forgotten. The disciples in Emmaus know that well. Maybe tonight we know that well too. But, and there's always something, but Jesus doesn't leave us there. He sees that's where the disciples are. He saw that that's where I was. He might see that's where you are tonight. But what does he do? He breaks the bread. In that moment where we feel like we're far from him, and that moment where maybe we focus on other things, even good things, our future, and maybe forget about Christ in the present, he breaks the bread, the Eucharist. And the disciples recognize him in the breaking of the bread. And their hearts are on fire again. They're moved again. They remember again. They see their friend again. And the friendship is restored. And now they're back in the present. And what happens? On fire with God's love in their hearts, completely on fire with God, what happens? Without them realizing it, one, they recognize Jesus. Two, the big question is answered. The big question of their lives that they've been wrestling about, confused about, debating all day, it's answered. They see the risen Christ, and what they see? They see their future. They see the answer to the question. And they turn around and they go back to Jerusalem to live the rest of their lives as disciples of Jesus. So if there's a question on your heart tonight, maybe a tough one, maybe an important one, maybe a difficult one, something to discern, maybe a vocation, that big thing, whatever it is, it's different for all of us. Maybe it's something you've asked Jesus about for days, for weeks, for months. For me, it was years. Maybe tonight, don't ask the question. Don't ask it. But spend time instead. Speak to Jesus about anything, about everything, and seek his friendship first and most of all. And when you recognize him here, this broken bread here, the bread of life, and when your heart burns within you in realizing his presence here, his love for you, his desire for friendship, when your heart burns within you like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, listen, and he'll answer. He always answers.